pictures.
You guys see me switch slides?
Yeah.
Okay. Hello, everyone. Thank you for watching our presentation. Today, we are going to present and talk about banned books for our public consciousness project. This is for our RHS 300 course, and we chose this topic because it directly intersects with our education, our mental health, and equality and human rights. Banning books doesn't just mean choosing what students get to read. It's about who gets to be seen, which voices, whose stories matter the most, and who and what gets silenced. Switching slides.
So our first slide is introduction to book bans. What are book bans? Book bans refer to the removal or restriction of books from libraries, schools, or prisons, often driven by political, social, and moral objections. Book bans have occurred very early throughout U.S. history. However, the scale of bans has increased significantly in more recent school years. Next slide.
Earliest book bans. So the history of book bans. Um, Historically, book bans were oftentimes driven by religion, morality, and just wanting to be in control. 1559, the Catholic Church created an index of books that were banned for being either too dangerous for their faith or their morals. It included many books by Galileo, Voltaire, and others, and the index remained in use for over 400 years until it was abolished in 1966. The 18th and 19th century, nation states controlled what professors were allowed to teach and publish in their classes, especially when it came to religion and politics. Academic freedom often clashed with the government's power. The U.S. Comstock Act outlawed the mailing of books and materials that were considered too obscene, like those on contraception and abortion. Um, Although they have a long history, it it never became a new issue, and it always just evolved with the different times. On to the next slide.
Recent bans/percentages. In the 2023-2024 school year, there were 10,046 instances of book bans covering 4,218 unique titles. 36% featured people of color, both fiction and nonfiction. 29% included LGBTQ plus characters, people, or themes. 28% featured trans and/or genderqueer characters. 64% of all picture books banned had LGBTQ plus characters or stories, totaling 73% of all graphic and illustrated books had LGBTQ plus representation, people of color, or discuss race/racism. 65% of banned books addressed violence, 55% discussed death and grief, and 43% involved abuse. Next slide. Who is affected? Educators. 65% of educators say book bans negatively impact their teaching, undermining their ability to provide diverse, thought-provoking materials. This limits their capacity to encourage critical thinking and intellectual growth. Students. 81% of educators believe book bans harm student engagement, and 72% say access restrictions lead to a decline in reading. Banning books reduces students' curiosity and their ability to explore diverse ideas. Next slide.
The immediate impacts. So mental health and social impacts. There are increased feelings of exclusion for marginalized groups, including LGBTQ plus and BIPOC youth. Um, Imagine being a student and never seeing yourself represented in any of the books that you're allowed to read. There's a loss of empathy for these unfamiliar perspectives, and it's essential for building an understanding when learning. This kind of this kind can lead to isolation and anxiety, identifying confusion, and especially when those books might help someone process trauma or understand their identity. This can also lead for burnout and feelings of isolation for the educators and the librarians and authors, not just the students. We have a quote here. It says, banning books about the lived experiences and history of marginalized groups and people only serves to increase feelings of exclusion and invincibility and intensifies their risk of mental health issues. Next slide.
So, for who was involved, one part is groups such as Moms for Liberty, No Left Turn in Education, Mass Resistance, local level Facebook groups, and all of these groups are responsible for at least half of all book bans. Another part is conservative parent groups and Republican lawmakers, and they have been involved since 2021, where they're typically restricting books with topics covering race, racism, gender identity, and sexual orientation. And they're also responsible for about 20% of the book bans from 2021 to 2022. And then another big part is political pressure from state officials and or elected lawmakers, and they are responsible for or just linked to about 40% of all book bans. Next slide. Some of the other influences besides these groups are the parental rights and education law in Florida, also known as the Don't Say Gay law. This law was signed by Ron DeSantis, and it essentially states that sexual orientation and gender identity cannot be taught or referenced in a K to third grade classroom or in any way that is not age or developmentally appropriate for students in agreement with the state's standards. Um, People who agree with this law say that like they claim that it lets parents decide when and how to inform their children of LGBTQ topics. And then another influence is educational gag orders, which was just what PEN America defines the laws, policies, and bills that restrict and control how businesses and educational institutions address race, racism, gender, and American history. Next slide. So, where are these book bans happening? Since July of 2021, there have been 43 states with book bans, 415 public school districts with book bans, and then 15,940 instances of book bans. Within the last 3 years, instances of book bans have been increasing, and from the 2021-2022 school year, there have been 2,532 book bans. In the 2022-2023 school year, there were 3,362 book bans. And then in the 2023-2024 school year, it increased more than double to 10,046, as we mentioned earlier. And then states with 100 plus book bans in the 2023-2024 school year are Florida with over 4,500 bans, Iowa with over 3,600 bans, Texas with over 500 bans, Wisconsin with more than 400 bans, Virginia with more than 100 bands, and then Kentucky with 100 bands. Next slide.
So here we have the 2023-2024 booked band state map. There's a key at the bottom. The gray has 0 bands. This tan color is 1 to 10 bands. A little bit oranger, 11 to 100 bands. The even oranger color, 101 to 200 bands. White is 201 to 400 bands. And this red orange is 401 to 500 bands. The red color is 501 to 600 bands. The other white is 601 to 3000 bands. This maroon color is 3001 to 4000 bands, and the black being 4001 to 5000 bands. As you can see, most there are 0 bands. However, there are still a lot of states that have more than 100 bands, like Florida is in the 4000 to 5000 range, which is crazy to think about. Um, Books being banned are normally about sexual health or identities and racism. They get targeted the most, as you can see on the map. So we're going to talk about some different books like The Bluest Eye, All Boys Aren't Blue, and The Hate That You Give Among. We're going to talk how those are the most banned books. So these books don't just help students understand their trauma, but it helps them understand their identity and social justice, and yet they're still labeled as obscene and end up getting banned in one or more of these states. Next slide.
So, for what type of books are being banned, one of the three main topics is sexual content, and this consists of things like sexual and reproductive health, sex education, teen pregnancy, sexual assault, abortion, and puberty. And this topic is in about two-thirds of all banned books. And the second content is LGBTQ plus, so this can be just featuring LGBTQ plus characters, any references of LGBTQ plus identities, or even just the suggestion of same-sex couples. Whenever any LGBTQ plus content is in a book, it is labeled as obscene and pornographic. And then the third content is mentions of race or racism. This can be having protagonists of color, um, histories of civil rights movements, or even biographies of people of color. And something else that can occur is there can be multiple of the content in a book that would make it even more banned. So next slide. These are just some examples of the types of content being banned. So for sexual content, there's things like The Bluest Eye by Toni Morrison, Looking for Alaska by John Green, Crank by Ellen Hopkins, Soul by Patricia McCormick. And then for LGBTQ plus, there are All Boys Aren't Blue by George M. Johnson, Genderqueer, a memoir by Maya Kobabe, I think. I don't know. The Perks of Being a Wallflower by Stephen Cosby, and Tango Makes Three by Justin Richardson and Peter Arno. And then for racism, there is the 1619 Project by Nicole Hannah Jones, The Hate You Give by Angie Thomas, The Color Purple by Alice Walker, and The New Kid by Jerry Craft. Next slide. So, for the first question, we're asking how can schools balance protecting students from potentially harmful content with promoting critical thinking and intellectual freedom? Next slide.
I also think it's important, this question is what are schools supposed to be? Like, why are they here? They're here to help students think for themselves so that when we ban books, ultimately, we're removing that opportunity for them.
Public opinion slash polls. 71% of Americans oppose efforts to remove books from libraries and schools. Party breakdown. 75% of Democrats oppose book bans. 58% of independents oppose book bans. And 70% of Republicans oppose book bans. Parental concerns. 60% of parents believe school libraries should restrict access to books based on age or require parental permission to do so. Next slide. Arguments against book bans. Educational value slash access to ideas. Many books are essential for understanding history and culture. Removing them limits students' educational opportunities. Parental rights versus community access. Parents can decide for their own children, but shouldn't restrict access to books for others. Empathy and social development. Literature enhances empathy and social understanding. It encourages readers to engage with diverse perspectives, promoting personal growth and emotional development. Next slide. Arguments in support of book bans. Some people believe banning books is necessary in order to avoid harmful material. Some argue exposure to certain topics too early can negatively affect child development. Protect children. Banning books with sexual content, drug use, violence, or profanity keeps kids safe. Preserve educational focus. Some argue controversial books distract from the core curriculum. Next slide.
So, for some ethical dilemmas, we have freedom versus protection, which just means should freedom of expression be limited to protect children from harmful content like violence or sexual content? There's educational value versus restrictions. So, should schools restrict access to books that promote critical thinking and diverse perspectives to avoid controversial topics? There's moral and cultural values versus diversity. So, should societal or cultural norms limit access to literature? And can banning books based on moral values suppress cultural diversity and silence marginalized voices? And then finally, we have alternatives to banning. So, is there a middle ground? Should we consider parental guidance or age based restrictions instead of outright bans? Next slide.
Question two. So, in what ways can RHS professionals contribute to discussions about book bans and advocate for students' rights in a professional and ethical manner? As RHS professionals, we work with people dealing with trauma and identity issues and abuse, which are all common themes that are found within banned books. S-
Force connection. Book bans reflect broader systematic issues that RHS professionals often work to address, such as inequality in education, censorship, and discrimination. Trauma-informed care. Some banned books deal with trauma, identity, or abuse. Removing these resources can limit healing opportunities for those affected. Cultural competency. Understanding diverse cultures and identities is key in RHS, and banned books often include LGBTQ+, which I mentioned earlier, and BIPOC, which stands for Black, Indigenous, and People of Color narratives that promote this understanding. Next slide.
So, who controls the narrative? Oftentimes, parents and members of the community are the first to raise concerns about different personal or cultural issues that are in certain books. Then the school board decides whether or not these concerns are valid enough and if they can stay or go into the school's curriculum and even their libraries. Sadly, students and readers' voices are often the last voice that is heard, even though they will ultimately be the most affected by these decisions. Lawmakers and government ultimately hold the most power to restrict or protect different access to certain books. As RHS professionals, like I said earlier, we need to advocate for our youth and protect their right to access all types of diverse knowledge. It's important that we create safe places for them to not only ask questions, but encourage their critical thinking skills. Some solutions. So, to defend the right that we have to read, we must promote teachings with our students and readers for how they can engage with diverse and complex topics. Instead of protecting what we might think is protecting them from these topics that are possibly controversial, encouraging uncomfortable conversations in schools and being open to having discussions about them. We have to keep people informed and educated when school board meetings come up so they're able to sign petitions or use their voice to speak up and allow their kids to oppose censorship. The solution isn't to have fewer and fewer books. It's to encourage everyone to be more open and to not only to be open to these controversial topics, but also the controversial books. Moving forward. So where and how do we move forward? We must stay curious and want to learn. We have to explore these controversial topics and the diverse authors, especially when they're challenging our social views. We have to defend our right to read and learn, not only for ourselves, but for the children in our country. We need to trust our youth to make the right choices when they read, and we need to give our youth safe places to talk about the controversial things that they're going to read. Censorship is only going to grow if we stop having these conversations because censorship grows in the silence. We have to keep talking and asking questions. Our conclusion: banning books only works to silence voices and limit diverse views on important topics. Banning books is a threat to our freedom and expression and diversity. As RHS professionals and citizens, we have to be responsible to fight for the right to read and to learn and to be heard. Thank you all for listening, and we hope that this presentation helped you see why this issue is so important, not only to us, but to everyone. And here are our references.